Well, since it's 9:05 and everyone is here, we will start our Buddhist radio hour. And tonight's special guest is Nagasena, the
Awesome.
venerable Abhidharma master that we met last week, and King Melinda, the Greek king who is questioning him on the Dharma. And last week, they discussed the nature of the soul, and Nagasena advocating that there is no such thing. There is just the constituent parts, similar to the way that there's really no such thing as a chariot. It's just you put some wheels and body together in a certain way, and then you call it a name called chariot. So, having discussed no self, interestingly enough, they pursue this, in a way, the same idea, but now we're going to look at rebirth. Of course, if there is no self, then, well, think about that. Chapter 2, Rebirth. He who is reborn, Nagasena, is he the same person or another? Neither the same nor another. Give me an illustration. In the case of a pot of milk, which turns first to curds, then to butter, then to ghee, it would not be right to say that the ghee, butter, and curds were the same as the milk, but they have come from that. So neither would it be right to say that they are something else. Is the man who will not be reborn aware of the fact? Yes, O king. How does he know it? By the cessation of all that is cause of condition of rebirth. As a farmer who does not plow or sow or reap would know that his granary is not getting filled up. In one Nagasena, in whom knowledge arises, does wisdom also arise? Yes, O king. Is knowledge the same as wisdom? Yes, O king. Then would he with his knowledge and wisdom be in ignorance about anything? He would still be in ignorance about the things he had not yet learned. But as regards what had been accomplished by wisdom, that is the perception of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and soullessness, he would not be ignorant. Then what would have happened to his delusions on those points? From the moment when knowledge arises, delusion passes away. As when the light comes, darkness disappears. And then what has become of his wisdom? When wisdom has accomplished its task, then it disappears. But his understanding of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and soullessness does not disappear. Give me an illustration. As a man who wants to write a letter at night would have a lamp lit and then write the letter. Then he would put out the lamp. But though the lamp had been put out, the letter would remain. Does he who will not be reborn feel any painful feeling? He may feel physical pain, O king, but not mental pain. If he feels physical, painful feelings, then why doesn't he just die and attain the extinction of grasping and put an end to suffering? Nagasena replies, the Arhat has no fondness for or aversion to life. He does not shake down the unripe fruit, but awaits the time of its maturity. For this was said by the Venerable Shariputra, the Buddha's chief disciple. It is not death nor life I cherish. As the hireling is waged, so I bide my time. It is not death nor life I long for. Mindfully and clearly comprehending, I bide my time. The king asked, is it a pleasant feeling, wholesome? Is it a pleasant feeling, wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral? It may be any one of the three. But surely, venerable sir, if wholesome conditions are not painful and painful ones are not wholesome, then there can be no wholesome condition that is at the same time painful. What do you think, O king, if a man were to hold in one hand a hot iron ball, and in the other a ball of ice, would they both hurt him? Indeed they would. Then your hypothesis must be wrong. If they are not both hot, but the heat hurts, and they are not both cold, but the cold hurts, then the pain does not come from the heat or the cold. I am not able to argue this with you. Please explain. Then the elder taught the king the Abhidharma, that there are 6 pleasures connected with the world, and 6 of renunciation, 6 worldly sorrows, and 6 of renunciation, and 6 neutral feelings in each case. Altogether, 36. Then there are 36 feelings in the past, present, and future. So altogether, there are 108 feelings. The king asked, what is it, Nagasena, that is reborn? Mind and matter. Is it this very mind and matter that is reborn? No, it is not. But by this mind and matter, deeds are done, and because of those deeds, another mind and matter is reborn. But that mind and matter is not thereby released from the results of its previous deeds. Give me an illustration. It is like a fire which a man might kindle, and having warmed himself, he might leave it burning and go away. Then if that fire were to set light to another man's field, and the owner were to seize him and accuse him before the king, and he were to say, Your Majesty, I did not set this man's field on fire. The fire that I left burning was different than the fire which burned his field. I'm not guilty. Would he deserve punishment? Indeed, yes, because whatever he might say, the latter fire resulted from the former one. Just so, O king, by this mind and matter deeds are done, and because those deeds another mind and matter is reborn, but that mind and matter is not thereby released from the results of his previous deeds. The king asked, will you, Nagasena, be reborn? And Nagasena replied, what is the use of asking that question again? Had I not already told you that if I die with clinging in my mind, I shall be reborn? If not, I shall not. The king asked, you're explaining just now about mind and matter. Therein, what is mind and what is matter? And the Nagasena answered, whatever is gross is materiality, whatever is subtle is mind, or mental states. Why are they not born separately? These conditions are related like the yolk of an egg and its shell. They always arise together, and thus they have been related throughout time immemorial. Nagasena, when you say time immemorial, what does time mean? Is there any such thing? Nagasena answered, time means past, present, and future. There are some for whom time exists, and some for whom it doesn't. Where there are beings who will be reborn, for them, time exists. Where there are beings who will not be reborn, for them, time does not exist. Well put, Nagasena. You're very clever. And so ends chapter 2, the discussion on rebirth. So in this chapter, you get one of the early discussions on the subject of death and the afterlife. And if you think about it, I mean, this is one of the basic, so to speak, existential questions that all humans have. I mean, what is death, and what happens when we die? Where do we go? And so this is the king. At the very beginning, this is the question he can't get an answer to. Where do we go? What is death? And who's there? And that's why he keeps repeating this question to Nagasena. Well, where are you going? And Nagasena simply gives him the principle, which is that if there's clinging, there'll be rebirth. And if there's no clinging, there will not be rebirth. So it's not a question about whether or not I, or the Buddha, or some saint, some previous bodhisattva has had rebirth. The question is going to be whether you're going to has stopped rebirth. The question is whether you are going to stop rebirth. So in that way, Nagasena reverses the question. It's kind of verbal jujitsu. And so the king has to think, well, do I want to be reborn or not? So in reflecting on this, I recall there are basically different kinds of rebirth. I want to talk about sort of the larger sense of rebirth. Early in human existence, very early, 1000 BC, 12,000 years ago, maybe even long before then, it's quite clear that humans had an idea of an afterlife. And to be an afterlife, there has to be a death, and then there has to be a rebirth. So actually, all Christianity believes in rebirth. Nobody goes to heaven without dying first. Not even Jesus did that. So there's always death and rebirth. And in the early human experience, and one gets a sense that the idea was seen as a kind of regeneration. It didn't have the negative quality that it would later assume in Indian culture, which leads to the Buddha. So when you think of kind of a primitive idea of rebirth, the obvious one, of course, is humans are like everything else in nature. We're on a seasonal pattern. And one thinks of like trees, which I have been studying all summer, and these fantastic living beings, some of which are over 300 or 400 years old, they can regenerate them. They stay alive for a really long time, but they're continually regenerating themselves. They die every fall and they come back in the spring. And so all their energy is pulled away from this world, from the visible, and is pulled down into the roots. And in fact, in a real sense, the intelligence of the tree and the enduring part of the tree is in the roots. It's not in the leaves. It's in the roots, and then it has a body. So the tree is kind of an inverted human being. Its mind is in its underground, in its roots. So its mind is actually invisible, just as our mind is invisible. And what you see of the tree is simply the body of the tree. Its intelligence and its communication is all happening underground. So when the tree dies, it pulls everything back, and it's sort of like us. When we die, we go back and we go into the dark, and then we come out again. So this is the idea of human regeneration. Humans are like we're like perennial plants. We die, we get reborn, we have our season. Meanwhile, and life goes on, and we're like everything else. We live and we live again, and we live again and again. And this is very comforting, and sometimes, and then it developed over later that you could be reborn in better places. It wasn't good enough just to be reborn back on the earth. So at some point, and Joseph Campbell calls this the Great Reversal, where this sort of fundamentally positive attitude of very early human beings that life was good and they just wanted it to continue, even if it had to, be interrupted once in a while. Gave way to a very pessimistic look that life was basically suffering, life was problematic. And he dates this to somewhere between 1,000 and 500 BC. And basically human civilization had evolved to a point where there were large-scale organized societies, and there were lots of warfare, and there was lots of disease, and there was just a lot more kinds of very much more pessimistic situation. And so that's where in India, particularly, this idea came that what you want to do is you want to liberate yourself from rebirth. You don't want to keep this dream of being reborn again and again. And in a way, that sort of represents a sense that society has fallen a notch. Because early on, everybody's just happy to be here and stay here. And then but later on, no, we want somewhere better. And then we sort of model our somewhere better on how the rich live and somewhere worse on how the poor live. So you actually have to have, just a little political note in here, you have to have income inequality to have this kind of change of view, right? But some people are living like they're in heaven and some people are living like hell. Now, and everybody's just part of a tribe. They're all living the same way. I mean, the tribe may have rough spots here and there, but everybody's in it together. But later on, things get spread out, right? So then you get this idea for most people, they're not having the best time. A few people are having a good time, but most are not. Or as good a time. So in India, in that period where before the Buddha, they started getting this idea of liberation. And they developed this idea that there were two paths for the seer, for the yogi. And the first path is the path of the mother, which is associated with the moon. And so when you die, you go to the moon. There may be a period where you're rewarded in some way. There may be some slight chastisement in some way. It might just be a space where you're reunited with all your ancestors. Lots of different possibilities there. But after that, your brief vacation in the lunar realm is over. It's back to Earth. So the realm of the mothers, the path of the mother, is the path of continual rebirth. And that's essentially the old view, the primitive view. And then and that's brought out in contrast to this new path that the seers are speaking of, and that's the path of the father. And the path of the fathers is the path of the son. And basically by becoming desireless, losing yourself, renouncing the world, you separate yourself from that karmic mechanism that keeps you cycling in the seasonal world of the mothers, and you break vertically up through the cosmos, up into the sun. And then you go and become a sort of a liberated in that fashion. The higher birth idea there's a couple images of that, and the one that I've been thinking of is the idea of the metamorphosis. Terry's summer hobby is growing monarch butterflies. So she's grown a few dozen of these monarchs, but she has a monarch room in the house where these butterflies are eating their way through milkweed, and then they go into a cocoon, and after the cocoon, they come out as butterflies, and she lets them back off into the wild. Well, this is this is a famous rebirth example, right? But it's still different than the tree. The tree is still a tree, it's just kind of dying and coming back as a tree, and it's, there's a continuity there, in a certain kind of way in the tree. But the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly is sort of like that example that we just got at the very beginning of this chapter, where Augustina says, well, is it the same thing or not? Well, you see the caterpillar and you see the butterfly, and well, one came from the other, but they're not at all the same. And when that caterpillar started, it starts as a tiny white speck, like a speck of salt. And then it grows to this caterpillar, and then it's a cocoon, and it's a butterfly, and that is the metamorphosis. So they're all interrelated, but they're evolving. This is evolving nature, and that's the idea of the metamorphosis, the cocoon. So in that sense, we can kind of we're on some sort of path of evolving. If you think of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it has this kind of view. After we die, we go essentially into a 49-day cocoon. So if you ever wonder what the caterpillar was experiencing in the cocoon, it's probably like the bardo, right? It's the caterpillar bardo. Visions of wrathful Buddhas and visions of peaceful Buddhas. But that's essentially what happens in the Tibetan view, which is a very fantastical, visionary, imaginary work. But in that view, everything, the Buddhas all come before you, and your whole life comes before you, and your fears come before you, and if you have any wisdom, then that's time to bring it out. And it's how should we say it, an existentially impactful time there in the bardo, where big choices are made. And the interesting thing about the Tibetan Book of the Dead is it has this kind of options. Now, when the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, it's going to come out as a monarch butterfly. It's not going to come out as an armadillo. It's not going to be a possibility. But in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it takes that idea, and you're in the bardo there, but that bardo is like a roulette wheel. You're just going around, and at some point it stops, and that's where I'm going, and off you go. So that is the most imaginative version of that idea of rebirth. Nowadays, despite the fact that occasionally the Tibetan Book of the Dead is talked about, no, I don't think the Tibetans themselves really do much with the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's kind of a medieval text even to them. Everybody in the Buddhist world in Mahayana Buddhist world. So Far East Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. Everyone believes that when you die, you take rebirth in the Pure Land, or we take rebirth back on Earth. So there's two kinds of rebirth. There's the rebirth, that primitive rebirth, when you come back to this life and its ties, tied by desire, or you take rebirth in the Pure Land. And the reason for this view is there's a kind of a more sense of humility among modern day practitioners in that nobody's blasting their way through to the solar hero status. You know, that we all have further maturing to do, but we want to do that under very favorable circumstances, and that's what the Pure Land gives us. So we look forward to a rebirth in the Pure Land, and that's true of Zen in China, which is sort of mixed with Pure Land Buddhism. In China, all Zen and Pure Land combined last century, and in Tibet, all the Tibetan gurus are all do Amitabha practice of death. In fact, Amitabha practice is done even in Zen monasteries of death. So that's the current view. But it is actually not Shakyamuni's view. Shakyamuni, he actually, and to quote him famously, he says, "I'm not interested in any part of a future life." The Buddha's not interested in any future life. He's not interested in the mothers. He's not interested in the path of the fathers. He's not interested in metamorphosis. He's not interested in Pure Land. He's not interested in any part of the future life. And as I quoted here, it is not death nor life that I long for. So that, at first that strikes you as a bit abrupt, shall we say. I don't care about any part of the future life. Whoa. But the only time you can say that is when you're completely in the moment. Because if you never leave the moment, then life and death and future life, there's nothing else but the moment. So there is no future life. A future life would only be something that the idea of a future life is the idea of a future life would only be something that took you out of the moment. And in fact, as we get to the very end of it, Nagasena sums it up perfectly when he says, "Where there are beings who will be reborn, for them time exists. Where there are beings who will not be reborn, for them time does not exist." So for the Buddha, in the moment, which is the timeless, there is no future life. There is no rebirth. And that's the Buddha's teaching on it, and that's the one that Nagasena relates to the king. When I wrote that quote down in my notebook, I'm not interested in any part of a future life. I did that last week when I was reading. I didn't put any quote marks around it. So when I picked up my notebook the day I was working on it, I thought, did I write that? Why did I say that? That's that's pushing it. And I realized it was actually a quote you could put it, not something I've written myself.
What is the text that's from?
I think it's actually comes in this text, or I'm paraphrasing it, but I may have gotten. It must be from one of the sutras, and I copied it down. I'm not sure exactly how I gotten it.
I'll look for it. I'll keep my eyes out for that one. So could you push that all the way to like somebody who's who's dying, like I guess you, like myself, when I'm dying, experiencing every kind of minute detail of that, and completely in the present moment, and so that it's not like even in that there's no death in dying, in a sense, like that you're just there, you're with whatever it is, and to call it death, you would never even experience it, actually, because you would just experience what you're experiencing. I'm not saying...
Well, yeah, you don't actually experience death. That's impossible. Because death is end of consciousness. You can't be consciousness of the end of consciousness. That would be a contradiction. So what you are is you're conscious of dying. Mm-hmm. But you don't know for sure you're dying, although sometimes I think you do. I mean, you feel like you're dying. But I had a sore throat over the weekend, and there were moments I felt like I was dying. So, I mean, this kind of feeling does not necessarily mean you are going to die.
So what about, I'm kind of surprised what you said about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. When I think of like Shitro, and then I'm still kind of moving through that Tulku Origin Rinpoche book about Dzogchen deity yoga, and that's all about Shitro and the wrathful.
I think there's some Tibetans who go that route, and then there's some that go toward the Pure Land. Mm. And some who they're aware of both, so they teach both. And so it's interesting, you have different options, so to speak.
Yeah.
Kuzulenko was a great fan of Dewa Chen, Amitabha's Paradise. And although he taught Shitro, it was not what he generally taught. Part of it is also, Shitro would be a rather advanced yogic meditation on death, if you will. I mean, it would really only be for a very few elite yogic practitioners. I think that the idea of sharing it, with every guy in California is not necessarily a great idea. I think they'd much better be served by Amitabha's practice. Because the temptation to imagine things as other than yourself, I think, would be reinforced. Is too easily to reinforce that. You have to be real. The thing is that in order for Shitro to not be totally dangerous to your karmic stream, you have to understand that the deities that are manifesting before you, the peaceful deities and the wrathful deities, are merely projections of your own inner energies. That's a fairly sophisticated understanding. And even if you theoretically understand it, and you understand it because you read the Tibetan book of the dead, 7 times, at the point of death, are you going to understand it well enough that you don't get taken in? I mean, you got to be really clear about that. I mean, if you have any sense that there's some external reality in those things, then they're going to be pretty painful. So that's why I think there's this sense of humility connected with the idea of Amitabha, and this sort of just resting in that. Now, there are subtle ways of understanding Amitabha. Even within the Pure Land tradition, Amitabha is sort of like clear light. So, dissolving into the clear light, which is, I think, the preferred way to die, and giving yourself to Amitabha are essentially the same thing. Even more, to be even more unorthodox here, I think a step down from Shitro is Hoa practice, where you do the thing with trying to eject your consciousness to heaven through the top of your head. Again, you're getting kind of you're reifying all kinds of things, are unnecessary. From the point of view of Dzogchen, where just opening to clear light, Buddha nature is really all that's needed. So in that secret teaching of Amitabha, where releasing yourself into Amitabha at the point of death is saying that releasing yourself into the clear light. There's nothing to remember. There's nothing that you lack, because Amitabha is already present. The clear light is already present. It's something that you're already familiar with. Amitabha has always been present. You can rest in Amitabha. You can rest in the clear light. You can have faith in Amitabha. That faith, that clarity, and that radiance, that's the primordial nature of Buddhahood, is always going to be there because it has always been there. It's here now. And so the Buddha, in his Buddha nature, in his pure Buddha nature, and speaking out from his pure Buddha nature, why does the Buddha take rebirth? The Buddha is beyond death and birth, in that space that's beyond death and birth. In that space, and nothing is an unchanging Dharmakaya reality. So very simple instructions on how to die. Not to leave anyone hanging.
Do you think the concept and the teaching of rebirth will last, uh, another generation or two in Buddhism? Because it seems like, when I listen to talks or read modern Buddhist books, it just keeps getting more and more de-emphasized. And a more modern, more scientific, I guess, worldview is taking its place. So, I mean, do you think as the old guard starts dying off, that the rebirth will just kind of fade away? Or do you think of...
Well, I don't know. I think the idea of rebirth, of one kind or another, you remember even being born in a Christian heaven or a Pure Land is a kind of rebirth. Rebirth is a perennial inspiration. So I don't think that's actually going anywhere. What modern Western culture, the divide between us and the Tibetans who are in a more medieval space, is the minimalistic nature of the modern. We just are in a non-elaborated mode. So it's not that we have a scientific understanding, because science doesn't believe in the mutable Buddha nature, especially. So there's nothing for the science to open for scientists. There's nothing for them to surrender into but the void. But for us, I mean, it's more positive than that. And it's also true to the idea of being in the moment, is that we're going to be in the moment even as we die, and we're not making any, not doing any speculation about what the next moment is going to be like. If we start doing a lot of speculation, other than to have some pleasant idea, like I'm going to be resting in the wisdom of Amitabha Buddha, which is not real specific, just not a lot of energy is put into imagining what the next world will be like. When I was teaching my class last fall for people on spiritualism and such, and I was talking about Christian ideas about the afterlife, and the interesting thing I realized in reading the New Testament, that Jesus, he never talks much about the afterlife. It's always very vague. It's about as vague as, it says it's the bosom of the Father, not on the Amitabha, of course. But he'll say, well, my Father's mansion has many rooms, or I go to be with my Father now. I mean, that's not real specific. He's not. Later, the mad visionary who wrote Revelations, he's got more of a dream going on, but Jesus himself never says much about it. Buddha doesn't say anything about it. The thing about Buddhism, if you go right back to the origin, and you go back even to the origin of Christianity, and you go back to Socrates, I mean, none of these people are painting elaborate pictures of the next world. They're living in this world, all the way through, and staying with this world all the way through. I'll be back in a second now. So it's nice. You can be, you have simple instructions about what to do when you die. You can be positive about the next life without having any specifics in mind. And you're perfectly in keeping with ancient tradition. The catch is not so much the next life. I mean, I don't think anyone fears death because it's an unknown. But all the seniors that I know, and everybody feels painful death, the painfulness of the dying process. And that's one of those unavoidables. And you saw here that even it comes up for this question, 2,000 years ago. Does he who not be reborn feel any painful feeling? So even if even if you're cool about, whether I'm reborn in a pure line or whether I'm not, it's not of any great account. I'm just here until whatever here becomes. But that doesn't mean I'm going to escape pain. And as Nagasena says, yes, he may feel physical pain, O king, but not mental pain. And so that's the catch, is that being human is by its very nature suffering. And that's what the sage understands. He understands that the human life is suffering, human life is impermanent, and human life essentially doesn't have itself. But actually, that part is good news. In fact, it's all good news. Even the suffering in a way is. I know if it's good as much as you might say it's necessary, because without suffering, there's no motivation. Dharmakaya Buddhas just stay in meditation all the time. Nothing ever happens. But we're not Dharmakaya Buddhas. We're in the thick of it. So our suffering, in a way, is our teacher. Our suffering kind of points us, in certain directions.
Isn't that kind of a circular argument? Because if we didn't have suffering, we wouldn't have anything to get away from.
Well, the Buddhist view is one of liberating ourselves from attachment to everything, but to create a kind of detachment. And in a sense, the world without suffering is envisioned as the God realm. So the gods live that life. They just have no suffering in the God realm. Nobody ever suffers there. So the problem with the God realm is that it doesn't go anywhere from the Buddhist point of view. I mean, personally, it's always sounded wonderful to me. But from the Buddhist point of view, the problem with the God realm is that you don't have any motivation to learn the Dharma, to practice, to do anything but be, completely indulgent. And there's sort of a sense that when the gods are all indulging themselves freely, so there's not really, kind of higher communication there. But so in that sense, the suffering is helpful because even if you get out of this stuff, suffering it's better to be in the human realm because you get the motivation to liberate yourself from the whole karmic cycle, which is the 6 realms. Because even though they've conquered suffering, the gods have not conquered impermanence. And that's the catch for them. is that their days, it may be a long time, but when this time is over, it's over. And then they can only go down. So you can escape suffering for a while, but you can't, because of impermanence, it's impossible to escape it altogether. So it's essentially what we have is the alternation of pleasure, happiness, and suffering. And it's the suffering that keeps us moving on the path, and the happiness that gives us a bit of a breather now and then. Although the Buddha doesn't say it quite like that.
It was making me think.
Well, no, go on.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Well, if there wasn't, I mean, my complaint is just complaining about how it is, but it seems like if there wasn't a lot of suffering, if all it was impermanence, then there would just simply be change that, changes from one experience to another without there being this horrendous realm of suffering that you could fall into. So it still seems to me like it's a circular argument that we have created to, we being humankind, the human mind, has created to focus our minds on, since suffering seems to be relatively unavoidable, that we wrap it up to insist that there's good in it to comfort ourselves.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, but ultimately you do put out. I mean, that view that why can't there just be impermanence and change, which keeps things fresh, actually,
Right.
and the suffering. Well, that's what a Pure Land is. Right? Pure Land is different than a God realm. God realm actually has impermanence, and it has no suffering, but it has impermanence. Pure Land, you get actually no suffering, and it doesn't. You don't fall out of it. So they improved upon the following year. I thought the Pure Land was an improvement on the God realm.
What about the Sogen masters that go like rainbow body? Do they attain nirvana? So they also are not reborn?
They're not reborn, presumably. They've attained nirvana sometime before they attain rainbow body. Rainbow body is sort of a spectacular form of parinirvana, final nirvana. It's a little show-offish, in my opinion. I mean, the Shakyamuni Buddha could die like a human being, and why do you have to do rainbow body? It's a little bit of yogic, slam dunk.
Yogic. So, I'm thinking about a couple of things. Like, the Pure Land would have wisdom where the God realm wouldn't. It would just have indulgence, right? Like, it's also an improvement in that
And
sense.
particularly, I mean, at different points, the gods get brought in for different purposes, but generally in the realm theory idea, the God realms are later on when the Tibetans get a hold of the God realm is definitely portrayed as a place of kind of unbridled sensual indulgence.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that I was thinking about was, and I think this is maybe to Don's question about rainbow body is, just related on a tangent. I'm thinking about that scientist Donald Hoffman, his theory is that Oh, well, two parts here. One, the first is that, and I think this is standard evolution, is that evolution is to fit for survival, and that actually the higher species or closer species gets to like 100%, we would say like wisdom or knowledge of reality. They get to 100% of that, they get to 0% fitness for survival. So knowing what reality is like anathema to survival. And he kind of he said he did like 400,000 computer models to show this, and the evolutionary theorists didn't argue with it at all, really. And then the other kind of part of that he said was that so he has a mathematical formula to say that he's totally Yogacara, and that mind is the only reality. That even like when you look at a brain, like it's just he's calling that a symbol, like everything you perceive, or it's all just symbol. It's just like an icon on the computer desktop is how he's thinking about it. It's totally out there, but he's testing the theory, and I don't get that part. But just maybe related to the rainbow bodies, that like what in the world is reality, and also like if you have I feel like too that the scientific model of consciousness, like everything ends in some kind of absurdity. Like it's absurd that this is an accident, but it's absurd that we'd be reborn in heaven, and it's absurd that we'd be like everything ends in an absurdity. I don't know, it's a rambling thing, but
that's a good point. Yeah, well, that's an approach. That's sort of more of the Zen Rinzai cone approach, where they give you an absurd cone, like, well, there's Buddha, 3 pounds of flax, and you meditate on that, and initially, to the rational mind, it's an absurdity. Right, they're 2 random things. What does it have to do with 3 pounds of flax?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to think about that for a while. And of course, thinking about that helps you because you're just trying to get a rational understanding of something that's fundamentally irrational. And the fact is that it is 2 random ideas. And because Buddha consciousness is generating a random universe each moment, and Buddha it could be anything. It could be a cotton bed sheet, glass of water. So it's getting that creative principle there. So befuddling your mind is a time-honored approach. It has to lead to some kind of opening, otherwise it's just befuddlement.
that's all I got.
Well, I'll leave you all to rest on the dollar tonight, and let's do our chant. By this merit, all the pain omniscience, may defeat the enemy, wrong. The worldly ways of birthful days, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings.
Thank you.
Adios.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Good night. Thanks, Bruce.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.